Joining me now is David Shirk. He is Political Science and International Relations Associate Professor at the University of San Diego. He is also the director of the Justice in Mexico Project. David, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin with this global headline out of President Pena Nieto's address that there would be this plan to build an international airport. It's going to cost an estimated $9.2 billion and, as Frank just reported, at a capacity of 120 million passengers a year. So how likely would this airport be to get built? And if it does happen, what do you think it's going to mean to the Mexican economy?
Well, infrastructure is obviously key to development. The challenge, as was mentioned in the reporting by Frank Contreras, is that it's very, in the past, particularly under President Fox, there were very serious protests against trying to actually locate a major airport. Whether or not the Pena Nieto administration will be able to overcome those political challenges that will no doubt result when you try to actually move people out of the way of such an airport remains to be seen. But it's a big promise, and it matches the president's ambitions for growing the Mexican economy.
Talk to me about Pena Nieto's approval ratings. They've really been slipping going into this address. 60% disapprove of his handling of the economy, 47% disapprove of his leadership. Do you think this is an indication of unevenness in the reforms that he's trying to implement, or is this just a fact that the reform process is a painful one?
I think that part of it is reaction to the reforms. But one thing we have to keep in mind is that voters and public opinion tends to watch the pocketbook. And last year, Mexico's economy only grew at about 1% growth, which was a low for many years in Mexico. And I think part of the reaction to Pena Nieto is the lackluster economic growth we've seen. This year, we're projected to see between 3% and 4% growth for Mexico, so his approval ratings will no doubt pick up a little bit. But the other problem is that Pena Nieto comes from Mexico's longtime ruling party, the PRI, and there's strong opposition on both the right and the left to the PRI. Whereas previous presidents from the PAN, both President Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderón, kept their numbers above 50%, they were able to get some support from either side of the aisle. But that's not true for the PRI, I think, because of its historical legacy.
I want to get to this need for electricity in Mexico that Frank also mentioned. We know that part of the president's plan has been to open up the energy sector for foreign direct investment. Is that likely to contribute to more access to electricity for the average Mexican?
Well, I think one thing that they're hoping to see and that the reforms have promised is to lower electrical prices and energy prices generally in Mexico. Often, despite the fact that Mexico is an oil-producing country, the price of gasoline just on the other side of the border from us here in San Diego, we see prices that are higher in Mexico than in the United States. So one objective is to lower overall energy costs for the average Mexican. Whether that happens will remain to be seen. There's a lot of devils that need to be gotten out in the details, but it has created a lot of consternation. This is a very important issue to a lot of Mexicans who view oil as their national patrimony, as something that is almost a birthright of every Mexican. And the idea of opening that up to foreign ownership of any kind or partial foreign ownership is something that is anathema to many Mexicans.
Right, I was just going to ask you to elaborate on that. It sounds like that could be a really tough part of his administration, maybe even cause his numbers to plummet even further.
Yeah, I think a lot of the negative reaction you're seeing right now is actually partly a reaction to this idea of privatizing oil. And this has been a sacred trust between the Mexican government and the Mexican people since the 1930s, when oil was nationalized in Mexico under President Lázaro Cárdenas. The idea of doing this has been around, of privatizing oil has been around for a long time, but it's actually taken, I think, a lot of leadership and initiative on the part of Pena Nieto to actually make it happen. And he's paying a price to some degree at the polls.
Our thanks to you, David Shirk, coming to us from the University of San Diego. Thanks for your time tonight.